I'd like to notify everyone that item number 5, approval of minutes, has been pulled from the agenda for this meeting. And it'll be placed on the agenda sometime going forward. So at this time, we have an opportunity for public comment. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on items within its jurisdiction, but not on the agenda. Prior to action by the committee on any item on this agenda, the public may comment on that item. Is there anyone that wishes to comment from the public?
I have a question. My name is Dan Metz. I'm from Oakhurst. I have some comments about the role and the responsibilities of the committee. Would it be best to discuss that during the public comment period or during, I think I see something on the agenda regarding that item.
Mr. Chair, that item is on the agenda.
Yeah,
so you can address it then.
You can address it. That's item number 8. Yeah, you can address it at that time, Mr. Metz.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so we have introductions, and I'd like to start by just going to my left with Max.
My name is Max Rodriguez. I represent District 4.
Hi, I'm Faustina Washburn, District 5. Janice Gomes, District 1.
Wayne Chapman, District 2.
April Molina, member at large.
I'm Terry Flanagan, member at large. Okay, so it looks like we're on item number 6, public meeting and the Brown Act training. And there is an enclosure. So this is for information and discussion only. We'll turn it over to our presenter.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thanks for having me. My name is Nick Papajohn. I'm with Alshire and Winder. Shannon asked if I could provide a presentation tonight on the Brown Act. So this is just a general overview of those laws. And let me share my screen with you. All right, can you all see the PowerPoint right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Oops. Good. Okay. I don't know why. Hang on a second. Sorry, I don't know why it's not starting from the beginning. All right, public meetings and the Brown Act. The topics we're going to be covering are the meeting rules on the Brown Act, the agenda requirements, and general process for conducting a meeting. So this is called the Ralph M. Brown Act. It's in the government code. And the essence of it is that all meetings of the legislative body, a local agency, shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency. So conducting business at open meetings, some general rules. Majority may not consult outside a properly noticed meeting open to the public. The key concept here would be what exactly constitutes a meeting. One example is serial communications, and we'll get into that in a following slide. There are exceptions for certain kinds of events, and the main thing is that a majority of the body does not consult among themselves, outside of public meeting. You may not react or comment to social media posts or comments by another member of the body. So that's recent legislation, that last one. So what is a meeting? The definition is that a meeting includes any gathering of a majority of the members of a legislative body to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any item which is within its subject matter jurisdiction. So the means of communication is pretty broad. Meeting includes Any use of direct communication, personnel, intermediaries, or technological devices which are employed by a majority of the members of the legislative body to develop a collective concurrence on action to be taken by members of the legislative body. So this includes emails, text messages, phone calls, group conferencing. It's pretty broad, the means of communication that fall under this rule. So more information about what is a meeting. Meetings take place if a quorum receives information on, discusses, or deliberates on any item on which the body may legally act. The meeting must be within the boundaries of the agency, and it applies to legislative bodies as well as advisory bodies. Special meetings, there's special rules. They're called by the chair or the majority, and you only need 24-hour notice for those rather than the typical 72-hour notice for a regular meeting. Serial and rotating meetings or polling is prohibited, but social gatherings are permitted. So serial meetings. A serial meeting is a meeting that any one time involves only a portion of a legislative body, but eventually involves a majority. So it can be in person, it can be a telephone, letters, email, text messages, social media. And then an example of a serial meeting, two main types of serial meetings are the chain serial meetings and the hub and spoke. Chain is what it sounds like. It's if member A contacts member B to express his or her opinion on a Measure T Oversight Committee related issue, and then B contacts member C and shares the opinions of members A and B, that could be a serial meeting in violation of the Brown Act. Even though it's two people at a time, eventually. But is there a question or? Okay, I thought I heard something. So that's one way that a serial meeting can take place. Another one is a hub and spoke, where you have an intermediary such as a staff member contacting at least a quorum of the members to develop a collective concurrence on action to be taken by the legislative body. So you got one person contacting multiple members to try to get an agreement on a particular item. That's also a violation of the Brown Act. And then, yes, yes.
Back to the chains. So the example, A contacts B, B contacts C. Okay, so that's 7 members on the committee. That's 3 people, right? Is that allowable, or do you have to reach that quorum threshold?
So it would be, yeah, it would be a majority. So it would have to be, I guess, in the oversight committee, it would have to be 4 members. So
Thank you.
yes. Okay, serial meetings and AB 992, which was enacted, I think it was a couple years ago, I think it was in 2020. Basically concerns social media use by legislative body members. So legislative body members shall not respond directly to any communication on an internet-based social media platform regarding a matter that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body that is made, posted, or shared by any other member of the legislative body. So this could be likes, thumbs up, emojis, sharing, or commenting. So this covers Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any of those types of forums. Those would all fall within this new law. And the takeaway is essentially that members should avoid commenting on or even liking or posting emojis on other responsive remarks on social media posts of another committee member, so as to avoid the possibility that a majority of the body is deemed to be engaged in a communication. So just something to be aware of is that there there is recent legislation that now covers includes social media. It's not just emails, text messages, phone calls. It's even broader now.
Nick, it's
Yeah.
Terry again. I read that and it's a little bit vague. Can you give us an example of how that would actually fall into place with the COC?
Right. So I guess it would be if there's a certain matter or an issue that's going to be coming before the committee, and a committee member decides to post something about that on their Facebook page, and it could be potentially it could be an opinion or some type of maybe not even an opinion, but just the posting something related to an item that's going to come before the committee potentially, and then having another committee member do a thumbs up for that post or respond or give an opinion on that post. That potentially could be considered a violation of this new law.
Is that on upcoming agenda items, or could that also apply to items that have been discussed and voted on and passed or failed? So on the front side and the back side as well?
That's a good question. I'd have to take a look at the statute again, but I mean, I think it would be safe to say it would apply to what's been in the past, but and also definitely going forward, whatever hasn't come before the committee yet. Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to check on it to see if it's if it concerns past past items that have either been approved or have been have failed. But I think that the general rule is that just whether it's happened in the past or it hasn't happened yet, I think if it's comes within the jurisdiction of the committee, to avoid commenting or liking some other committee member's post on that item, just to be safe.
Thanks.
So a big reminder is that emails and text messages may be subject to public disclosure under the Public Records Act. So it doesn't matter if you're messaging from a personal device or personal email account. If the content of the communication concerns the business that falls in the jurisdiction of the committee, then that could be subject to disclosure. If you ever do receive a Public Records Act request and there's questions about whether or not communication would be responsive or is exempt from disclosure, that's definitely something that you can contact our office about, and we can evaluate that for you if you have a concern.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So is this concerning just the people on the board? But what if you have an email from a person of the community asking you a question about something coming up? Can you answer them?
Oh, yes, you can answer, yes. But just keep in mind that those communications, even if they're on your private cell phone number or private email, those could be subject to disclosure because of the nature of the communication, of what of what the content is. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay? You're welcome. So what is not a meeting? If a quorum does not receive information on, discusses, or deliberates on any item on which the body may legally act, then the following generally are not meetings. So individual contacts, so just one-on-ones, public conferences, other local agency meetings, community meetings, when you're meeting with the public, and then social gatherings, whatever that might be. Those are generally not meetings. Okay, agenda requirements. A written agenda must be prepared for each regular or adjourned regular meeting of each legislative body. So no action may be taken if an item is not on the agenda unless it is a qualified emergency item. The agenda requirements, the general requirements is that they must be posted at least 72 hours in advance of the meeting. And there needs to be a brief description sufficient to inform the public of the nature of each item that will be considered for that meeting. Another question, I guess a question I get sometimes is whether or not the 72 hours requirement applies just to the agenda or also to all the documentation that might be related to the agenda. And this requirement specifically applies to the agenda itself. Additional documentation or information can be received within the 72-hour time period, but the key there is that once that's provided to the committee, it's also made available to the public at the same time. So if there's additional information that comes in, after the agenda has been posted, but before the meeting, that's allowed. It's just that also needs to be made available to the public at the same time. So it's that's just something to keep in mind as well. Okay, remote participation. There are two different processes now, and the second one is really it comes out of the pandemic and how there needed to be another way to have remote appearances that would be somewhat easier for members to qualify for. So you have the traditional way, which is still an option. That a quorum must be within the area covered by the Oversight Committee. And then the teleconferencing locations must be posted on the agenda, and the agendas must be posted at each teleconferencing location. So each location must be open to the public. So that's the traditional, that's the way it was before COVID, and that's still what it is now. However, there's this alternative process where members can teleconference without following those traditional requirements, but there needs to be a just cause or emergency circumstances, and you can only use it a limited amount of times each year. The quorum still needs to meet in person at the same physical location within the jurisdiction of the Oversight Committee, and then there's also other requirements to allow remote participation. So let's see, I think the next slide covers a bit more. So just cause and emergency circumstances. These are the definitions. Emergency circumstances means that there's a physical or family medical emergency that prevents a member from attending in person. Just cause means any of the following. So child care or caregiving need of a child, parents, grandparents, etc. Some type of child or caregiving that requires participation remotely. If you have a contagious illness that prevents you from attending in person, that qualifies. Physical or mental disability, that's defined in other sections of the code. And then also, if you're traveling while on official business of the legislative body or another state or local agency. So there are these exceptions or these alternatives, but in order to take advantage of this alternative teleconferencing procedure, it's fairly narrow. You have to fit into one of these categories in order to take advantage of the looser requirements. Another big thing is during meetings, you want to make sure that you stay on point. All matters to be transacted or discussed. So in other words, make sure that we're only discussing items that are on the agenda. So sometimes there could be a public comment or something that isn't necessarily on point with what's on the agenda and what's to be discussed for the meeting. So we just have to make sure that we're not getting too sidetracked, and we can address those items, but in a limited fashion, and there can't be any real in-depth conversation or discussion about something that's not on the agenda. You have to include a reasonable period of time for public comments before or during the consideration of each item. It can be, it could be 3 minutes, it could be 5 minutes. It's up to the committee, but just there just needs to be time and opportunity for someone from the public to comment if anyone wishes. If you want to add a new matter, the body must make these 3 findings: that the committee became aware of the need for the action after the agenda was posted. Immediate action is necessary, and there must be 2/3 vote of the membership. And if less than 2/3 is present, then the vote needs to be unanimous. So whoever is present needs to vote in favor of adding the matter. And then exceptions, no discussion of any item not on the agenda except brief responses, statements or questions for clarification, reference to staff or other resources for factual information, or requesting staff to report at a subsequent meeting in more detail. Public participation in meetings. Anyone can attend open meetings. It's public. It's open to the public. You cannot require names, questionnaires, or conditions to attendance. You can ask, but it can't be required. Public may record proceedings by video, film, or audio tape. If a meeting is willfully interrupted, or order cannot be restored by removing only the disrupting individuals after a warning. A body may order the room cleared. So that's in extreme circumstances. It doesn't happen too often, but there is a process for handling those types of situations. Public comment periods. The public has the right to talk about anything they want that's not on the agenda. Members of the public get to speak on each and every item on the agenda before deliberations have been made. Closed session. There are 4 common grounds for closed session: real property negotiations, pending or anticipated litigation, labor negotiations, and personnel matters. And for personnel matters, you have to give employees at least 24-hour written notice of the right to have their charges heard in open session.
Nick,
Yes.
it's Terry. I have a question on that. I ran into that closed session I saw 10 or 12 days ago. As the incoming chair, I had requested a closed session, and I was correctly informed by staff that under the Brown Act, this committee does not, the topic that I wanted to discuss in closed session did not fall within the criteria. So while further researching that, under the Brown Act, committees were not specifically mentioned. Commissions, yes, boards, and such, governing boards and county supervisors, et cetera. But the one exception in the Brown Act, it said standing committees are required to perform under the Brown Act. So are we considered a standing committee? And if yes, at what point does that terminate, if you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, and I think I'd have to look at the formation documents for the committee to see what exactly what it is the committee is under the law. But I mean, it's a good question, but I'm not sure what the answer is at the moment on that one.
Can you get back to Sandy maybe on that when you find out?
Sure.
Thanks.
So for closed session items, confidentiality does apply. And there are certain things you can't discuss. You can't discuss funds, funding priorities, or budgets, salaries, or contract negotiations unless they're labor negotiations. So a lot of that has to be, done in public during the main part of the meeting. And then once the closed session's over, you reconvene an open session and then make any required disclosure. If there was any decisions that were made, or any actions that needed to be taken, then a general description of whatever took place, or if there were no further actions, then that needs to be stated in open session after the closed session convenes. There are several penalties for failing to comply. They vary from the nullification of the decision that's at issue, possible criminal charges, injunction, mandamus, and declaratory relief. A challenger can demand corrective action within 90 days of the action, or 30 days if it's an agenda issue. And then 30 days to correct the action before the suit. So the city has, or the committee has time to make a correction, before a lawsuit can be filed, if a correction is needed. And then also there's the potential for adverse media attention if it turns out that there's allegations that the committee or any legislative body has done something in violation of the Brown Act. That's always a potential a news news item.
Could you explain the point number 3 on that?
The injunction or mandamus. Okay, so it's basically there's the potential that someone can file an action to either stop the committee from making a decision, or could potentially require the committee to change the decision. It's basically seeking the court to intervene and to give some type of relief to whoever's filing the lawsuit.
Okay.
So, another question?
Yeah, thank you. So are we indemnified in any way if someone, member of the community or group didn't like a decision, one of the board members, how they voted or a decision that came and we were sued? Are we sued personally, or are we sued, under the county umbrella? And how would that work?
It would be the county, or it wouldn't be you individually, because it's a general consensus or a committee action. It's not just one person. I think there are very limited situations where a committee member could be sued individually, but when it comes to these types of these issues, it's concerning the committee or the county as a whole. So the lawsuit wouldn't be against the individual if it's some action that was taken by the committee. It would be the entity that would be at issue, at fault, potentially, not the individual committee member.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
So best practices: assume all information is public or will become public. Don't discuss committee business with fellow decision makers outside of the meetings. So that's just a good best practice to try to practice. For conducting a meeting, the committee may but is not required to adopt rules and procedures for the conduct of meetings. So the two main ones, two bodies, would be the Roberts Rules of Orders or Rosenberg's. And most local agencies are moving towards Rosenberg's because it's just a little bit easier to use, a bit more approachable. But other agencies also use Roberts. So those are the two main rules of order that's used for these meetings. So Generally, just as an overview, for running a meeting, you need to establish a quorum. So this must be at least a majority of the total membership. The meeting must be stopped if a quorum is not present. Or if a quorum is never achieved, then the meeting can't go forward. You have to determine if the chair is present, and if so, the vice chair presides. Or I guess if the chair is,
That's an awkward sentence.
yeah, I'm reading it right now. So it's the chair, if the chair is present, then the chair would preside. But if the chair is not present, then the vice chair would preside. And then if both are absent, then the secretary calls the meeting to order and a temporary chair is selected until the chair or vice chair is present. Is that better? Okay. So then you call the meeting to order and then you follow the agenda. New items cannot be added to the agenda at the meeting absent the qualifying emergency issues that we briefly discussed earlier. Agenda items can be moved around. You can reorder the agenda if the committee so chooses. And then you call each agenda item, and then you adjourn the meeting. Public input, again, these rules should help make a meeting very public friendly for agenda items. So first, you tell the public what the commission will be doing. Second, you keep the public informed while the body is doing it. And then third, when the commission has acted, tell the public body what the body did. Or sorry, tell the public what the body did. So you lay out the matter during the discussion, make sure that the public's informed, and then if the commission takes an action, then just make it clear as to what action it is that the commission's taking, whether it's approval or a denial, whatever it may be. And then, so this is the process for a particular agenda item. So the chair calls the agenda item. Any required conflict disclosures by the commissioners should be made. The staff makes a presentation, and then the committee asks clarifying questions of the staff, if any. The chair opens the public comment on the item. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it can be limited to 3 or more minutes. But the key there is just making sure that the time limit is applied equally for everyone. So you're not giving one person more time to speak than another person. The public then has a chance to offer their comments if there are any. Then the chair closes public comments, and then there's discussion and deliberation by the commission only. So you can ask clarification questions of staff at that time as well. And then once the deliberations are complete, then the chair calls for a motion, or a commissioner makes a motion, and then another seconds the motion. Then the chair calls for the vote, and then the chair announces the results of the vote. And then for workshops and presentations, process is a little bit different. So the chair calls the item, and then conflict disclosures are made at that point. Staff makes a presentation. There are then clarifying questions for staff. And then public comment is not legally required for workshops or presentations. However, the chair can decide to have public comments. And this is suggested as having public comment is also consistent with the committee's purpose of ensuring that the Measure T funds are spent as promised to the public. And then if applicable, the public offers comments, if any, and then the chair closes the public comments. And then discussion and feedback from the commission, if any, would take place. And then something to take note of is that no action can be taken by the commission on any workshop or presentation items. So there would be no vote for these types of items. And then that's it. So that's the general overview of the Brown Act and public meetings. So if you have any other questions, I'm available. I'm here.
Anyone from the public have any questions?
I have a question on slide number 22. That's the right slide.
Okay.
The second bullet, Dan Metz, by the way. The second bullet point says you cannot discuss in a closed session contract negotiations. In the previous slide, I thought it said contract negotiations are suitable. for Real property negotiations, for example.
So there are certain negotiations, labor negotiations and real property negotiations specifically are closed session, do fall under the closed session umbrella. However, there are other generally contract negotiations. In other words, you can't really negotiate a contract for other items during the closed session. So you can't, you can't come up with, you can't determine what certain terms are going to be, or you can't change language in a contract, during the closed session. That's not something that falls within one of the categories.
Still a little unclear, but that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's a general, I mean, if there's specific questions as to what, if something comes up and there's a question as to whether or not that would apply for closed session, and you can definitely ask us, but generally, contract negotiations are not allowed, except for, if it concerns real property or labor.
Maybe for instance, is recently there was a contract with a consultant to help with education and outreach. And I think the only thing that was public about that was, here are the results of the negotiations. So it would seem to me that the contract negotiations with that consultant were done behind closed doors. And yet it doesn't seem reasonable that it would have to be a public negotiation at the same time. So how does that fit?
Well, so I mean, that can happen outside of a meeting. So I mean, that's something that's probably done on the staff level.
Right.
So that wouldn't be something that would qualify for closed session or be required to be discussed during a public meeting. And that's something that,
Okay, that makes sense.
yeah, that'd be all wrapped up ahead of time, and then the results of the final form of the contract and the terms would then be presented for approval or denial.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, Nick, thank you very much. It was a good presentation and we appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right, that brings us up to agenda item number 7, overview of Measure T program. I believe this is going to be presented by Troy.
Yes.
Do we have any public comment on this item?
Not now. Maybe after.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for all being here. Thank you for your willingness to volunteer on this committee. We respect your time, and so we thought that today would be a good opportunity, with a lot of you being newer on the committee, to talk about the Brown Act, which I think was hopefully educational for all of us. all of us participate to some level in various meetings or public meetings and understanding the rules for ourselves, but also keep our city council and board members, doing what they're supposed to be doing is a good thing. So the next thing is understanding, what is Measure T? And then the next item on the agenda is understanding what is your role in regards to Measure T. And so hopefully in the next few minutes, you'll have a better increased understanding of what is Measure T and what are the programs, and then also what is your role in regards to that. So Measure T is a 1/2-cent sales tax measure that was passed in 2006 by the voters. Just to give some background and history and context, we had a previous sales tax measure called Measure A that was ran from 1990 to 2005. So we've had a sales tax measure for transportation for over 30 years in our county for various programs and projects for in regards to transportation. The current Measure T projections, they're going to go through March 31st of 2027, which is the sunset date for the current measure. There are approximately 217 million in sales tax receipts. The Measure T is administered by the Madera County Transportation Authority, or MCTA, and they're administered in accordance with the plans and programs outlined in the investment plan and the strategic plan. All of you should have a copy of the investment plan in front of you. Investment plan is what essentially went to voters that highlighted the program, the programs, all the allocations to those programs. And we're going to talk about those programs here in just a second. The strategic plan then provides the biannual updates to the plan that highlights projects and highlights updated forecasting of estimates for planning purposes, so that our local agencies who implement projects can plan and budget for what is to come, what they can plan for. And so you should have a copy, I believe, of the investment plan, like I mentioned, and also the last approved strategic plan. Those are good documents to review and understand, and helping to understand Measure T, and also understanding your role in approving an annual report from this committee. Real quick, what are the programs? The first one is the Commute Corridor or Farm to Market program. We internally call it the regional program, and there's two parts to the regional program. One part is 26% goes towards regional type projects. They're projects that aren't necessarily specific to one jurisdiction. They're to benefit the region. They're usually capacity increasing or larger type projects that we've done. We're going to talk about what some of those projects have been in the past, and then the few that are coming up soon. There was also a 25% that goes toward our local agencies that they use for rehab, and it has to be on a roadway that is what we call a regionally significant roadway. Within our traffic model, we have all those roads identified, or what are the regionally significant roadways, and the agencies have to use those funds towards improvements on those roadways, on those streets. Next slide. The next program is the Safe Routes to Schools and Jobs program. It's about 44% of the money. 21.75% goes towards a street maintenance program. And so this is where all your potholes and street repairs, your crews, your road crews from each of the agencies, they are partially funded with these Measure T dollars that go into their budget to help do these improvements. So if a resident, calls up their public works department and says, hey, I've got a pothole on my street, or hey, this road's falling apart, or whatever the problem is, the lines are disappearing, on the roadway. We can't see them anymore. We need them restriped or repainted. They put in that request to those maintenance and operations departments. Some of that could be, and most likely is being funded with there's these Measure T dollars to do that work. There's also 21.75% that goes into a flexible pot. Without going into too much detail, we could be here all night talking about this. One of the requirements of the regional program is that each of the agencies have a traffic impact fee program that pays at least 20% of the cost of each regional project. And if they don't have a traffic impact fee program or sufficient revenues to cover that minimum 20%, those flexible funds are impounded by the authority into using their regional program for those regional projects in place of those traffic impact fees that they're supposed to contribute. And just for information, the flexible funds for the city of Madera and County of Madera have been impounded from day one. The city of Chowchilla received some for the first few years, and then they've impounded since then as well, either because they didn't have a traffic impact fee program that covered those projects, or they didn't have enough to cover their minimum 20% requirement. And so in essence, the flexible funds have been used in the regional program to help deliver those regional projects. There is a little bit of money, it's 0.5% that goes towards ADA compliance programs. Those are your curb cuts and any other street ADA improvements. As you can see, over the course of 20 years, $1 million, it's really not that much money. And so a lot of our agencies have been reserving those funds. They haven't spent a lot of them because they need so much just to do a project. And so they've been reserving them and accumulating them over the years for that program. Next slide. The next program is the Transit Enhancement Program. Transit program receives 2% of the Measure T revenues. And these revenues are to help enhance or to make improvements to the transit system. The transit system receives quite a few federal and state dollars to operate and to purchase capital, to do capital type projects, whether they be new vehicles or new transit centers or what have you. They receive a significant amount. And so Measure T helps to enhance those programs to help them maybe make those dollars go farther. I know City of Madera spent a significant amount of transit money on bus shelters. So when Measure T started, and 17 years ago, there weren't very many bus shelters in the City of Madera, and now I think they have over 30 to 40 of them. And you'd probably know about that, right?
Yeah. My question is, why did private citizens have to get together to fund, those solar stop signs where the blinking lights, which is, I feel, very safe signs, as far as the signs, and private citizens had to do that. Why didn't the city and county?
That is a good question that I would refer you to those city councils and board of supervisors to ask that question, and those public works department. I don't know the answer to that.
I know that when I was a supervisor, I brought it up, and the person in charge, he just smiled and he said, "Oh, the liability." What liability was he talking about?
Yeah.
Because those signs are it's a safety issue there.
Yes.
And
Measure T funds could, in essence, could help fund projects like that. If the agency so want to implement those projects, Measure T is eligible for those type of projects, for sure. A portion of the transit money was for ADA as well, ADA type projects. As you can see, it was only 0.17% and not a lot of money over the 20 years. So a lot of them have been accumulating those funds to try to make ADA improvements towards their systems.
I have a question on that. I strongly agree with what Max says. Those signs are highly effective when you're driving through the school zones. So would the public bring that to the MCTA at one of their meetings? You mentioned city council, et cetera, but the overall body that might be able to contribute to those projects is the MCTA, right?
So if the public has a project that they want to implement or suggest or recommend, the course of action is to go to that specific jurisdiction, the city of Madera, city of Chowchilla, or county of Madera, and request that project. And then the agencies may consult with the authority or the commission on how to fund that project. There are some funds that we administer in our office outside of Measure T that could potentially do those projects. But here, the authority and the commission, we don't decide projects. We just help administer the funding that goes towards those projects.
Okay, so then the city council or the local agencies, et cetera, they're the moving party. Then they would have to bring something to the MCTA's attention, a request of some sort.
It depends on what it is. It may not even necessarily go to the board. Sometimes they'll say, hey, we want to do this project with these funds, and we say, okay. And submit for reimbursement, we'll pay you back, and so like I said, we don't decide the projects. We just make sure that the funding is administered per the laws and regulations as required.
Fair enough.
But we have no decision-making authority in those projects.
Thank you.
Next slide. And then the last program, before admin, the last program for our local agencies is the Environmental Enhancement Program. It's 2%. This was to help improve air quality and environment through 4 programs: environment mitigation, improving, limiting our PM10 or 2.5 emissions. That's like your dust, and then bicycle pedestrian facilities, car and van pools. I know our agencies have done a lot to. We have there's federal funds called congestion mitigation and air quality program. And a lot of times they'll use Measure T as the required match to those federal grants, to fill those federal grant monies to do projects. And you'll see anything from shoulder paving to help bring down dust, to transit vehicles, to roundabouts, to electric vehicles and electric infrastructure type projects. Anything to do to help cut down on emissions and improve air quality in the region. This program is to help enhance those programs. Like I said, they primarily use them to match other federal and state grants for those type of projects.
Question.
Yeah.
So this is the second time I've seen carpooling. How does all of this fit? Because my understanding of carpooling is like 2 moms get together and they switch off taking kids to school. So how does this money address carpools?
That is a very good question. So if 2 moms get together, let's just say a community, right? A community gets together and we want to start a carpool van pool program. They could go to the local jurisdiction and say, hey, we want to start this carpool van pool program to cut down on emissions, to improve safety, what have you, right? You have your list of reasons. And we just don't know how to totally fund it all. We have some issues to do it, to implement it. Measure T dollars could pay for those type of expenses. But it would have to be through the local jurisdiction that would do a community level type program. And so, for example, in Fresno, they have a similar program. They have Measure C, which is equivalent to Measure T. They have a senior program for carpooling and for like taxi strips. So seniors can qualify to receive Measure T dollars through these programs to help them with their transportation needs. And so that's where it could come, but they would have to show some type of a community benefit to be eligible for the Measure T dollar. But in theory, it's possible.
Okay. Thank you.
We currently don't have any of those.
Right.
But sometimes it starts with a person that has an idea and can start something, right? That's how anything gets started, but it is an eligible source. Next slide. And then there's 2% that goes towards administration and planning that helps pay for auditors, helps pay for staff time to do all the work necessary to administer the program, disperse funds, our time to do, help with the Citizens Oversight Committee, prepare agendas, what have you. That is what the 2% goes for. It's really over 20 years. It's not a ton of money because the majority of it goes towards not staff time. The Public Utilities Code only says that the most 1% can go towards 1%. That's not even 2%. That's wrong, right? Because we only get 1%. That's a typo. We only get 1%. And so 1%, so the Public Utilities Code says 1% max for salaries and benefits. And so the majority of the money actually goes towards auditors and other costs. To publish the Citizen Oversight Committee annual report in the paper, for example, that's a cost that gets paid with the administration dollars for that. So that's actually a typo. It's 1% on there. Those are all the programs. Anyone have any questions on any of the programs?
Well, just overall, so everyone can grasp what you're talking about. When you're talking about 1.97 million under the current Measure T, that's over 20 years.
20 years.
So what is the, just ballpark, the annual revenue expected? I know it fluctuates year to year, but give me a ballpark like for the past 3 years. The
So
annual
for
revenue Measure T.
22-23, the receipts were 16.2 million. The first year was 7 million. And so we have, seen a steady rise as we've had more businesses, more economy, more population, inflation. You see higher sales tax receipts.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. I just want everyone to understand we're talking about, not those big bucks. That's in the totality of.
Yes, that's these numbers are all for 20 years.
Yeah.
For the life of the measure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions about the programs?
Any questions from the public?
I have a question when it's my turn.
Yeah. You ready to go to public comment on?
Yeah.
That's my presentation. I can answer any questions and.
Sure.
turn over to
Yeah.
public
Let's
comment.
open it up to the committee. Does anyone have any questions? Specifically?
At this point, I do have more to cover, but
Okay.
we can take a break here and move on to the next section.
What's your preference? Or you want to take questions after that you totally presented it?
So the next section is talking about some of the regional projects to go over some of those.
Mr. Metz, what was your?
I have a question about the 1 versus the 2%. I believe the state code says 1% for salaries and benefits.
Yes, as I mentioned, yes.
Yes. And 16 million, let's see, 1% of that is 160,000. What are the salaries and benefits of whoever this applies to?
So in 22-23, of that 162,000, that was eligible for the authority for administration. About 60,000 of that was salaries, approximately.
So
What's that question?
MCTC has 8 employees and that's more than 60,000. So where does that money come from?
To pay for all the employees.
Pay for all 8 employees?
So the commission is primarily federally and state grant funded. So the MCTA money, the administrative money, is a very small percentage of how we're funded.
Thank you.
All right, we can go on to the next section on projects real quick. So in our regional program, we called it kind of a phase 1 and a phase 2. And so let's talk about the phase 1 projects. All these projects have been completed. You might recall them. So the very first one was the Eller Street Overcrossing project, which I'm assuming if you're in the city of Madera, you probably used a lot. I know I've used it a lot. I love it. It's a great project. Very beneficial to get that side of town without having to go through Cleveland and Gateway train tracks mess. And so the Eller Street Overcrossing project was a welcome project. 4th Street widening, which is where you have all your city hall, county government building, that whole street and bridge was widened through there. That was a Measure T project. The State Route 99 and Avenue 12 interchange projects. If you're down here in town, probably used that project as well. That bridge over there, that's all new. That was a Measure T project. The 41 passing lanes project was a Measure T project. As you can see, the next project is the 99 winding from Avenue 12 to Avenue 17 to go from 2 to 3 lanes, which was a much needed welcome project. We're excited about the next section to come online, the 7 to 12 here soon, and a little bit of it, when I say a little bit, $9,000 of Measure T dollars went towards that. And the rest of the 100 million is coming from other state and federal sources, which is awesome. But as you can see in the funding, the cost versus how much Measure T contributed, Measure T only contributed, portions of the cost. And so Measure T is a good source to help leverage other federal and state funding sources. And without having a local source that we control locally, it's sometimes really hard to get those federal and state dollars to do larger projects, because we just don't get enough revenue to do a lot of big projects. So we rely on other outside funding sources. Measure T, or a sales tax measure in general, helps us to be a player at the table to ask for those dollars. We're willing to put up a little bit of our local money, and we expect, some of our tax dollars that go, that the federal and state government collects to come back here and help us here. Measure T helps us to do that. Next slide. This is just a quick map of those phase 1 projects that were done. Slide. So phase two, some of the projects have been completed and the rest of them will be coming online soon. So 2 of the projects have been recently completed. The Oakhurst Midtown Connector, which was a new road, a new bridge. They received a $5 million SB1 grant that we were only able to get because we had a sales tax measure that we qualified to ask for those dollars as a competitive grant. And so that helped, that $5 million helped to do improvements and enhancements on State Route 41 where it intersected with that road, that new road. And then drop down to number 3 there, the Road 200 phase 3, which is the Feingold Creek Bridge. We just recently had a ribbon cutting on that last week for that project. That project was recently completed, and Measure T funds paid for that. And then the next projects coming up are in Chowchilla on State Route 33 interchange. There's going to be some improvements on there. They're looking at widening the bridge and putting in some roundabouts to help with the traffic flow around that area to increase capacity and improve safety. To also put in pedestrian access that there is none right now. We have people crossing that bridge on a motorized scooter trying to get over to the grocery store, and there's no safe way to do that, but they're still doing it because that's their only way to get to the store. And so we're trying to work with Caltrans, because it's a state facility, on securing the funding to do that project. The project is currently completed or about ready to wrap up and sign their environmental document and to go into their planning and engineering phase. We hope that will be in construction in 2026 at the latest. The next 2 projects are within the city of Madera, the Cleveland Avenue and Gateway Avenue widening projects. Those are still to be programmed. We'll be doing a strategic plan update. The strategic plan is the document that's before you that has the green on the cover. We hope to put one of those wherever the next project is, the Cleveland or Gateway, into the strategic plan update. That will be hopefully a draft released later this year for public review before adoption.
Are those both within the city of Madera?
Correct.
So help me understand, when the money is leveraged, the grants, et cetera, who's the moving party on that? Is it the MCTA, the MCTC, or is it the city?
All the above.
Okay.
It just depends on what funding source we're trying to go after and get. Where we come in is sometimes we have the relationships to ask for the money. Not necessarily we administer it or apply for it, but we help negotiate to get the funds from the state or federal government through grants or through other programs to get the funding for that. So sometimes we will help, like I said, negotiate on behalf of the local agency or concurrently with the local agency to get those funds. Sometimes they're competitive grants and you fill out a grant and you apply for it and you get it. The city or the county of Madera recently received a $25 million federal grant for 41 widening project that hopefully will be online soon for widening. between Avenue 12 and Avenue 15. That's in the works. It's in the planning and engineering stage. But they're trying to get all the construction funding for that. 25 million of it just got awarded from the federal government under the new transportation bill for that. So that's a win. And those are all things that help us to go for those type of money because we have a sales tax measure. We can put money on the table, to help leverage those funds. But so what is our role is, yeah, we help ask for the money as best we can to the point that we can. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, for clarification,
Yes.
SR 233, where exactly is that?
So in Chowchilla, Robertson Boulevard, that whole main street through town, that's State Route 233. And it goes all the way up to the interchange and all the way through town, all the way to the other side of town. Mr. Chapman can probably explain more as a citizen of Chowchilla.
Right now, it's a one-lane bridge. It doesn't work well. The sidewalks are about this wide on the bridge. People are trying to take scooters and
So
bikes.
is that widening the whole road or just a bridge?
Yeah, so it's putting roundabouts, actually both sides to improve traffic flow on and off the freeway. And right now there's no lights. And so people are coming because you have schools and you get off the freeway and you can't turn left. It's, and so the traffic backs up. And so they're trying to find a safe way and economical way because money is limited on how to make improvements. But part of that is to widen the bridge, put in better sidewalks and pedestrian bicycle access through the bridge to access the grocery store on the other side of the bridge.
So the slides is clear, I'm sorry, were you through?
Yeah, so like on this map on the back here. This is the inset, that says Madera City, so that's not on.
That might be a typo. If you're looking, is that the one you're looking at for phase 1 or phase 2?
Well, this is phase 2.
So. If you want to go to the-
No, sorry.
To right there, so phase 2, so.
Is that Chowchilla or is that Madera?
Let me take a look. This is, so this is. What is that? What project is that? This is the 12 to 17, right? Or what is this? No, this is the gateway.
Oh,
Here's Cleveland Gateway.
so the.
So the Chowchilla one is
233
not
is
shown.
not on
It's
there.
up here. It's right here.
You know.
There's not one of these, but it's right here.
Okay, yeah.
You get off the freeway in Chowchilla, you're on 233.
Robertson Boulevard is.
Robertson Boulevard. Yeah.
233.
Yeah,
So we
99
turn
right
to the
there.
grocery store that way, and the meetings that way. Okay. You go over the overpass, you're going into town. Yeah.
With all the palm trees.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's the last slide, Sandy, on the project, right?
Yeah, can you back that up? I had a question. One more.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so the 233 on that, moving over to the right, it says clearance expected December 2021.
Okay, yeah, so this is an older slide, so, so including I'm just looking at that like, oh, the project costs have even changed. So this is an older slide, I apologize about that. But the environmental clearance was supposed to be in July. I need to verify if the Caltrans director signed the document, but it was essentially done at the end of June.
But they haven't broken ground on anything yet.
Oh, no, that won't happen until we receive we're still trying to secure all the construction funding.
Okay.
So we're in the process of securing all that right now.
So if something in 2021, they want to grab their share of the Measure T funds and they're involved in a approval process that could take multiple years, is that money impounded? Is that put in an escrow account, or how does that work to make sure when they get either the matching funds or whatever it is coming forward over a couple of years, where's the money?
So part of it could be money on hand.
Yeah.
And part of it could be expected money to come.
Okay.
So we have to have a reasonable assurance. If it's Measure T dollars, we have to give them a reasonable assurance that the money is on hand. And that's where our cash flow forecasting and model that we have for that and expected revenues. And so I monitor it on a monthly basis, you know, what are our receipts versus what have planned expenditures, to make sure we have sufficient to cover all that. And we're really, our board and staff are very conservative on that, to make sure we don't run into any issues with that. When it comes to federal and state funding, those are generally, if it's a state facility project, that's all handled through the state. We don't touch those dollars. We don't get involved in that. And they handle it internally of how they handle those dollars. I'm not sure how they're processed, but they handle it internally there.
Okay, and then when you begin a project, when you break ground, is there a separate account for that? Is money set aside in an account solely for that particular project?
It depends on who's implementing the project, and if it's Caltrans, we sign an agreement with them, and then they will bill as costs are incurred. And so, like I said, generally, we have to show we have the money either in the bank account, or we will have it in the bank account. So we generally don't necessarily have all the cash on hand, but it just has to be reasonably assured that we will.
How would one audit a particular project then? You know, you have, let's say, the connector road in Oakhurst. How can one take a snapshot, look at the financial matters involved in that? Is it all lumped together with all the Measure T funds, or is it cut out separately?
So usually these large projects are funded with multiple funding sources.
Right.
And so, and you have to go back to the implementing agency. That particular project was the county. And so I would refer you to the county to have them give you an accounting of all of their, how it was funded and how it was handled. So what they've done for me, because Measure T paid for it, I received invoices of, hey, we've incurred these $2 million of construction expenses, whatever, progress invoice, and they submit it in for reimbursement. I review it, make sure everything's good to go, and then we cut a check essentially from the Measure T account over to the county.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And the same thing with Caltrans. Caltrans will send us an invoice, processed the same way, you know, and it gets processed. And usually the fund, when I say cut a check, is a lot of times nowadays, all the money is sent electronically. There's no actual hard copy check. That's all electronic payments.
I have a couple of questions, but it's public's turn.
That would be now, Mr. Metz. Thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
Good presentation.
This looks like an out-of-date set of slides to me.
Some of the information is out of date. That's my bad. I apologize about that.
For example, Road 22,
Correct.
200 Phase 3.
Correct.
That's 14 million.
It is that is an old number. That's correct. I saw that and was like, oh, dang it.
8.6 is through March 31st, and there's another 6 million on top of that. So,
Correct. Yeah.
The other comment is on Road 41, maybe the previous State Route 41 on the previous slide. I think that's where that is. Yeah, the passing lanes. I really appreciate those passing lanes. However, everybody speeds up to 70 and 75 miles an hour, and then slows down to 55 or 49, you know, whatever. But it's just interesting. And then the other comment is on the previous slide. I think it is the map showing what was accomplished on phase 1.
So I can probably know your question on those passing lanes. You talking about the passing lane picture?
Yeah, I'm talking about
Yeah.
item 4 on it.
Yeah, that's not an exact. That was from the original
Right.
plan, but not was actually completed on that particular map. We have another map that shows. So what he's referring to is in the plan, the passing lanes were to be between these certain limits between. But again, you have to remember, it's a state facility and Caltrans is owner operator. So when they will look to do a passing lane project, there's rules that have to be followed. And so they only allowed us to do passing lane between certain limits. And it wasn't as far as we would hope or what we wanted to do.
That highlighted area is 9 miles. The actual passing lanes are only 1 mile. So that map needs to be updated.
Yeah, it's, I do have a different map on a different sheet, just not on this one. So this wasn't done in-house, these slides and map. A consultant did these for us. But I can get you an updated map, yeah.
Considering how
Wanted to
much
point
we
that
pay
out.
consultants,
You should have it
they
right.
should be up to date. I'm sorry.
I should have caught that in time and put in the right map. I apologize about that. So that leads us, the overview of Measure T, this is the next item, but before next item, Chair, if there's any other questions,
Anyone have any questions? I have one. And I'm just trying to be consistent in my life. I've worked with school districts for 20 years and I'm familiar with bond measures. And I saw it there and I complained, and I saw it here and I complained a couple of years ago, you probably remember, but in the, the MCTC has they're big on transparency. And I just have to tell you, it's not a half cent tax. If I go into Wayne and I say, Wayne, I want a F-350 Super Duty.
I don't have those.
Is it, okay, Corvette. Corvette, even better. It's not gonna be a half cent, right?
yeah, it's a 0.5%.
Right.
Yeah, I remember the conversation.
Yeah, I think you should take a good look at that. The MCTA should
Yeah.
take a.
And in fact, to be honest with you, we sometimes use those terminology interchangeably. Because in our field, it has the same meaning, but I understand to the public,
To the public,
right?
right?
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, it's a 0.5% sales tax.
Good presentation. I've learned more here than I have in the past 4 years.
Great, I'm glad to hear that, and that was the purpose and intent of today.
Yeah, and the opportunity to ask questions. So, thank you.
We can move on to the next item, Mr. Chair, if we're ready for that.
Let's call item number 8, roles and responsibility of Measure T Citizens Oversight Committee members. Mr. Metz, you had some comments.
Let's do the presentation first, and then we can have comment, yeah.
Okay.
So you should have a printout of a separate oversight committee. It's appendix,
It's like this.
Together.
it's appendix C or D, I can't remember.
Appendix C.
Appendix C. So this is actually within the investment plan. So the document has the big blue on the front. This is one of the pages from that document. And we printed it separate just to make it easier to look at. So what I'm going to share and talk about comes right from the plan that was approved by voters of the roles and responsibilities of the Citizens Oversight Committee. So in there, it states that the purpose of the committee is to inform the public and to ensure that the transportation measure funding program revenues and expenditures are spent as promised to the public. To created to provide an increased level of accountability for the allocation of Measure T revenues to ensure the program is functioning as promised. And it's comprised of 7 members, as you know, there's 1 from each supervisory district and then 2 members at large. For the most part, we've done a pretty good job having volunteers from our communities to serve on the Citizens Oversight Committee. We've been very appreciative of all those citizens that have done that. It's been very appreciative, helps our job as staff to go easier when we have volunteers such as yourself to do these committees. Next slide. So this is right from the plan. The role is to receive and review. I highlighted and bolded a couple of words there. To receive, review, inspect, and recommend action on independent financial performance audits related to the measure, as well as other reports, studies, and plans from responsible agencies. So in our next meeting, we hope to cover one of the main purposes of the committee is to receive information from the auditors that did the audits. To review audits, and so you'll be provided a copy of all the audits that were done and have an opportunity to ask questions of the auditors or staff. And as well as within this, our local agencies also give reports on how they're using the Measure T dollars as far as how they're using them. And that's part of the other report studies and plans from responsible agencies. So within there, there's two words that I wanted to highlight, is review and to recommend action. And again, you're not approving anything, but you can recommend action of making improvements, or to, if you have a recommended action to our local agencies of how they should spend the dollars. That's one of the roles of the committees, to make recommendations. Doesn't mean that they have to implement those recommendations, but your role is to make recommendations of how money should be spent. The next bullet, it says review. Yeah, you have a question on that one?
Yeah, so I obviously for 4 years saw all the financial presentations by the CPAs. And I interpreted that as a financial audit, correct? I don't recall seeing any performance audits.
Yeah, so we typically have not done like project specific performance audits, but where the financial audit, so one of the jobs is to make sure that they're spent as promised to the public. So as long as they're within those categories, we talked about all those programs. So for example, transit money can't be spent on streets and roads, right? And that's where we can say that is a performance audit, but we don't have and never have conducted, and it's not required anywhere that we do project specific audits, performance audits. I know that there's been comments about that. There's been, there's a critique about that. And it's something that to really look at is like, should we have that? Should we have, it's not required anywhere in the statute or the ordinance or in the plan. But it is something that could be recommended from the committee. And also if we were to renew the measure, it's definitely something that could be put in a new measure or a new plan going forward to require certain performance audits, for sure.
So ongoing, I think the committee would be interested, I'm sure, in knowing in any particular project that's broken ground. Is it on time? Is it on budget?
Yep.
Are there any problems?
Yep.
Yeah, we always hear the good side of it, but are there any major overruns that put a hole in the budget, stuff like that? So,
For example, Road 200, Phase 3, the bridge that just got put in, had some major issues with the storms that came in, and they had all their faults work up and almost lost the project. And it would cost millions of dollars to start over. And how did they handle that? And what was the results of that? And those are good questions to ask. So this committee can make those recommendations to the local agencies to come back and report on that at a future meeting, right?
Thank you.
Review and comment upon measure expenditures to ensure that they are consistent with the investment plan. That's kind of what I mentioned previously, is to make sure that all the expenditures are consistent with the investment plan, the allocations. For example, if it says, I'll just throw this out there, 10% is supposed to go to this program, well, would the 10% actually go to that program, right? That's a legitimate question. And then the last thing is to present committee recommendations, findings, and requests to the public and the authority in a formal annual report. So historically, the annual report from the committee has been a letter format, very simple. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I say that because just because something's been done a certain way doesn't mean that's how it always has to be done. This committee decides what they want in their annual report. And this is the language right from the plan, investment plan, right from the appendix on implementing guidelines to present recommendations, findings, and requests to the public and authority in a formal annual report. Next slide. Okay, just really quick, what does Measure T mean for the county of Madera? Just to kind of highlight a couple things. It helps to address mobility needs. It's a 20-year life. We've already mentioned the importance of leveraging. It helps deliver projects sooner rather than originally planned. If you saw the page on the regional projects, and a lot of them said, we were able to deliver this project a decade earlier because we had Measure T. If we didn't have Measure T, it would have had to wait, which would have been probably more expensive to deliver those projects. So it helps us to get projects done sooner. Next slide. Enhance public safety, because we should have better roads, right? Improve air quality and better partnerships with local agencies and Caltrans. And so the words that were used in the very beginning of the measure, even before it passed, was safer, quicker, and better roads. So that leads into my next slide? My next slide. So as you know, I just really want to really quick address that, as we know, the Measure T renewal was on the ballot in 2022, it didn't pass. And the biggest thing that we heard during the process and after the process, we did a survey after the election, was people want their roads fixed, potholes fixed. And whether you drive here in the city of Madera, city of Chowchilla, or in county, unincorporated county roads, in general, there's a lot of them that are just bad. And so if we want to do safer, quicker, better roads, is the continuing mantra, we need to be strategic in how to, if we were to put this back on the ballot, have voters approve a new measures, how can we really do that? The Measure T focus, as you saw, half the money went towards regional projects. Some went to maintenance. And so does more money need to go to maintenance to really improve our roads? That's a legitimate question. And it's an observation from staff that we see. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention that you might have opportunities and invitations to provide feedback, give surveys, polling. Our board has directed staff to pursue the effort. We recently, Mr. Metz mentioned a public outreach consultant one was recently hired to help with that process. We're going to be out at the Madera District Fair. We're going to be out at the Oakhurst Fall Festival again. We're going to be out at the Old Timers Day booth in the park. We're going to be out at the Pomegranate Festival. We're going to be out maybe at the Chowchilla Classic Car Show, in the park there. We're going to try to go out to any and all to have conversations, to solicit feedback in all forms, whether it be in person, through email, through text, through surveys, through mailers. Because what we've heard is everyone agrees that we need a measure, but the previous measure maybe wasn't what the people wanted. And so we need to start anew and, okay, what will the people support? And it requires input and feedback from everybody to get to that point. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, because you probably are aware of it or will hear about it in some form, especially if people find out if you're a committee member, hey, what do you know? Tell us more about this. So hopefully today has been educational and helpful in understanding what is Measure T, if you are asked questions, how you can answer those questions, and also where there's room for improvement, and where we can go from here. We have just a few years left on the current measure, but the hope is that we have a measure in the future as well, because I think we need it. I'll be bold to say that. I think we need it to help our roads and help our transportation in general, to move people. And so I'm available for any questions.
I have one. What was the reason for making it only 20 years?
The current measure? I believe that was based upon historical, what other people were doing at the time back in 2006. The steering committee determined that. So I came on right after Measure T, right before Measure T was passed. So I was not part of the Measure T steering committee, but that's what they came up with based upon best practices. And the first measure was 15 years, second measure was 20 years. Currently, most measures that we're seeing that are being passed in the last 5-6 years have been 30-year measures. There's pros and cons to any years of measures. The previous one in 2022, the plan was until ended by voters. With the thought is, and I'm just making assumptions from the staff level, the board made those decisions of, we've had it for 30 years, we have needs, and so we need to have a dependable funding source to help pay for that. And the public didn't support that. So that's where we're at. Good question. Any other questions?
Yeah, oh, did you have one, Max? On the, I occasionally, drop in audio only on the Zoom meetings and, the MCTC, and it was a very interesting debate when they were, discussing the agenda item for the consultant.
Yeah.
Very interesting debate, and,
To say the least.
yeah, it was good. So, my question is, the consultant that they ultimately did hire was the same one that was recommended by
Correct.
staff. Was that the same consultant that was the consultant on the,
No.
Okay,
We have all new consultants and people involved in this and in our new effort.
okay, and I'm glad I asked that because I had some bad information then.
Yeah, because some of the comments that we received from the public was, we need kind of new faces, new players, so to speak, to talk about this. And so we heard, we listened, and it's like, well, we need to, and to be honest with you, they had the best proposal out of all of them.
Sounds good.
And that's why the scoring committee, I think, recommended them.
Thank you.
I got one question. Is the goal to be back on the ballot in 24?
I believe that's the direction that we're moving towards, but if there's not support from the public, then it won't make the ballot. So that's where we're at right now, is to determine if there is support. And what do people want to see?
Because you're starting to get to the point you're handicapped on what future projects you can do.
Correct.
We've got projects on the books that aren't
Correct.
even starting.
And they take years to plan, and if you don't have a reliable funding source, you can't start the planning on them because you don't know how they're going to be funded, and so nothing gets started. And we're this is a critical juncture. The other thing is this is a county-wide measure, so it benefits the whole county. Some of the elected officials from the city of Madera, and I'm okay with saying this because he's said it publicly a few times and was in the meeting. One of our board members stated that if it doesn't pass in 2024, the city of Madera will probably go themselves and do their own in 2026, which may mean nothing for unincorporated county, or perhaps even city of Chowchilla, which I think would be unfortunate, because they need projects just as much as city of Madera. And how do we get, a funding source to do projects?
Is there a reasoning why the mountain area had the roundabout, the bridge and the bypass, and now nothing for a long time, and now it's all gonna be in town? Why those can't be mixed? And so people can see, I mean, if you're paying taxes for 30 years and you see nothing happening
Yes.
in the one area, it makes you like, why am I gonna pay this
Yeah.
tax? Rather than space them apart, I mean, some in this area, some in this area.
I'm not afraid to admit from staff, and I'll even speak on local agencies out there, says public outreach on a lot of the projects is poor. A lot of projects were simple projects of maintenance, street maintenance and road maintenance that were Measure T expenditures that weren't talked about or publicized. The only ones that really got publicized were the big ones, right? And those are the ones that people saw. Well, because those are easy to publicize, right? But there was a lot of projects that happened with measured dollars in all parts of the county that just weren't talked about and publicized or outreached. And that was unfortunate. It's kind of like lessons learned. We need, and as staff, we've stressed to our implementing agencies, you need to be better about that, because the public doesn't, they don't know what they don't know. It's like you need to help them know what is going on with these taxpayer dollars, because there were projects going on. They just weren't publicizing them. We didn't even know a lot of times because they're not required to report every single small project, right? A lot of the money passed through to those programs. We gave them the money quarterly. So here's the money. And then they just yes, we did projects, right? But the only ones they had to report on were the larger regional projects, right? They did a lot in maintenance districts, a lot in all parts of the county, in the city as well. And it's unfortunate. But great comment, great question. And I would, you know, invite you to go to the county board of supervisors, 'cause I know you're in the county jurisdiction, to make that comment. Like, you guys need to do a better job of doing outreach on all your projects, not just the big one. You know, the two big ones we got. So that you know.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
That is a really good point. May I ask, in your experience, what can be better done for better communication? So that those scenarios of a individual being heard, so that her taxes are being put to use for her home or road and businesses.
It's almost requesting more accountability and transparency. So as staff, we don't have the authority to request that. All we can do is what is in the guidelines and what has been planned, what is thing, and a lot of it's vague. And so it's hard for us to say, okay, in order to get your money, you gotta do da, 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 da. All we can do is ask. We ask them to outreach. We ask them to make the public know for the last 16 years. And if they did it, great. If they didn't, then it's unfortunate that they didn't. And I'm okay, you know, if the county or someone wants to come talk to me, local agency staff, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus. It's just the reality. That's
You can't do a spreadsheet.
yeah. Maybe.
So do you guys have a
So-
website where you're putting all this information out?
So the only things that we really have information on are those regional projects. The regional rehab and then the larger regional capacity increasing projects, because they reported those to us. But the small, what streets they fixed on potholes, we don't have that information.
Recommendation I would have, if they do a large 99 project, it says these funds provided by the Obama Act or whatever.
Yeah.
Why don't we have signage up when you're
Yeah.
doing a small road and filling 42 potholes in the road? Put a sign up, Measure T is paying for
And
this.
we did have that requirement, put up a sign anytime you do a Measure T project.
I never saw a Measure T sign.
I saw them on the big ones just because I looked for them, but
I
not,
see,
on the
I
bridge.
see SB1 signs all over, but
Yeah.
I've never seen a Measure T sign.
and a lot of the SB1 projects are usually matched with Measure T dollars. They usually put them both together to do a project.
So maybe that needs to be in the public eye.
You
And
need
when I
to
go back to a
make it
role of a
right.
recommend action from the committee, that is a valid recommended action.
They already took the sign down of a Road 200 bridge. I'd leave it up there for a
We
while,
asked them to
6
take-
months or something,
We
you
didn't
know?
ask them to take it down.
You have to take it down?
No, we didn't ask them to take it down.
Oh,
I don't know what the rules are, if they have to per the rules of the road. I don't know what those are. They might have been required to take it down because of safety reasons. I don't know. It could have been the contractor took it down not knowing.
So, were there any other comments?
Right here.
I have several comments to make.
One quick question, Mr. S. I'll be brief. If a committee member wanted to know about the Measure T funds utilized by maintenance districts, who do we contact to
The
find?
county public works department.
Okay, and that is that Jared?
It'd be Jared Carter would be over at capital projects and Phil Toller would be on the maintenance side of
Okay.
projects.
Yeah, and I asked that because I've been asked the same thing.
Yeah.
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 Okay,
They would know or have a list or could get the information.
thank you. Mr. Metz, your time has arrived.
Right, may I use the
Absolutely.
podium?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Coffee stains. Remember
I know
college,
coffee.
high school, you stayed up late, coffee stains. My name is Dan Metz. I'm from Oakhurst. I am a part of Sierra Citizens for Sensible Government. And I'm just a citizen interested in getting the biggest bang for our buck. If we can, I'd like to go back to a couple of slides, Sandy, if we may do that on Troy's presentation. I think it's about slide 18 where we talked about roles and responsibilities. There were three bullet points on the slide, which hopefully will appear in a minute. And actually in the investment plan, there are 5 bullet points. And the first comment is on the, I believe it was the second bullet point talked about. There are 4 verbs on most of these bullet
I'm
points.
sorry, which page?
I think it was 1 or 2 more beyond that.
This way or that way?
Forward. No, back. No, that one, no,
I think it's one back.
one,
I think it's right there.
that one, thank you. There are 3 bullet points there in the first, and there's actually 5 in the investment plan. So I'd like to highlight the additional 2 for you, if I may. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on what Troy presented. He had a limited time and hit the highlights and hit them very well. But on the first bullet point, it talks about performance audits. And the problem is there are no performance audits. So how can you review, receive, inspect, and recommend action on a performance audit if there is no performance audit? So the first thing to do is, in my opinion, is to ask for performance audits. The second thing is to notice that there are 4 verbs: receive, review, inspect. Let's see, one of the other bullet points missing, I think this is it, is to receive, review, and recommend action on other periodic reports, studies, and plans from responsible agencies. That might be.
I
sort of-
combine those.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Another bullet point is to review and comment on measure expenditures to ensure that they are consistent with the investment plan. I think that's up there. And then another one that's not shown is annually review how sales tax receipts are being spent and publicized as a result. I don't see that one up there. So review sales tax receipts and publicize results. And then the final bullet is present committee recommendations, findings, and requests to the public and to the authority. Basically, what I see from the past Measure T COCs is just the high-level financial audit review. I don't see any of these things in there, and I would encourage you as a citizen, I would like to see those things. Now, if we go back to 2006, when the measure was passed, there are 3 elements. There is the language in the ballot measure. There is the resolution that the board presented. And the third thing is the investment plan. Those things are tied inextricably together. The ballot measure talks about the resolution. The resolution talks about the investment plan. As far as I'm concerned, that's a contract with the public. These bullet points are a part of that contract. So we ask as citizens, and you are citizens, you represent us, and we could equally be on the, perhaps be on the committee. We ask that you would pursue those kinds of things to help us understand, to publicize, to dig deeper into the records, into the processes, into the management of the fund. I think there are some obligations in 2006 that weren't met. And so if you look at those, maybe that will help understand why Measure T in 2022 did not pass and needs to be corrected in the upcoming version 2024. So thank you very much for your time, Mr. Metz. And I do want to say Troy did a great job. I'm not trying to cast aspersions.
I have kind of a question in regards to that. When you were going over the review and recommendation actions, I had a flashback because you said, but they don't have to do it. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? Because that reminds me of, I'm sorry to say, the grand jury, because I was on it and we made recommendations and nobody
Are
paid.
you referring to performance audits? I made a comment about performance audits, that there is nothing in there that requires them specifically. The only time it's ever mentioned is really in this section here, is that the committee can receive, review, and inspect if there are any, but there's nothing that requires it that they have to do them. And so that's why I brought up to your attention that it could be a recommended action from the committee to the local agency, the implementing agencies, to provide some type of a project audit or a performance audit. I would be careful on, my recommendation is to not have them look at every single project, because that can be very cumbersome and really not cost effective. But to look at maybe specific projects or specific areas or specific things of concern. Our auditors, they randomly test things, our independent auditors, that's what they do. They independently test things. And so if they find something, they test more, right? But they can't, it's not cost effective to look at every single piece of paper,
No, I understand.
every single thing. And so what those look like or what are we requesting needs to be thought out, and like, what is it that we want to look at? And what can we recommend of information that we would like to inspect as a Citizens Oversight Committee, so that you as a committee can issue a report to the public.
Right.
On that note, would it be possible to ask or recommend a performance audit on like, if there's a project we know that's coming up on, like on your little spreadsheet, like have it listed in there, like, and we would like to see a performance audit on this particular project, like, you know what I'm saying?
I understand, I think I understand you're saying that's a possibility.
Yeah,
You can make their recommendation and the ask,
right,
and so then the agencies would then have to say whether they will or not.
whether they will or not, okay.
Right. And I think it needs to be important, like what kind of information are you wanting, right, on that project? And that way they can start from the beginning of the project to look at that, especially if it's construction, right? What information do we really care about, I guess, is, what information is important as a citizen, right? What does the citizens want to know?
Is it over budget? That's always.
Yeah, and you, Rob, what are the budget, what are the concerns, or what are the problems that have come up, like, a lot of times we never hear about those things.
Yeah.
Right, because if a citizen found out that $8 million project took 14 million to fix, they may not know why.
Yeah.
They may not know that the
Yeah.
flood wiped your project
Yeah.
out. All they
Right.
know is you were way over budget.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'll give an example of the Avenue 1299 interchange project. On our list, I want to say that started off as approximately $35 million project. If you sit on there, ended up being a $99 million project. Like, what the heck happened? Now, we didn't put more Measure T on it. But we had to put other funding source on it, but why did it cost that much more money? And there's an answer, right? Those are maybe the type of questions, if I was in your shoes, that I would be asking, right, or wanting to know. Right. Sometimes we can't, nothing we can do, can't fix it in the meantime, but at least give me the information that we're aware,
Well, if
so that we're
we
transparent.
know why it's happened on completed projects, we could have a little more warning what's happening on future
For
projects.
future projects, right? Yeah, absolutely, and that's the intent of it, right? So I just want to say before we end this thing, I want to appreciate, like I said, you, but also for the public to come and make comment. It's not often where we have people from the public, here at these committee meetings, it's not the most interesting stuff, and we appreciate you volunteering your time, and we're at almost 2 hours here, but I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, and unless you have any other questions,
No, we will have an opportunity for that. So that brings us to number 9. Thanks, Troy. other items. So, it was brought to my attention that we, are going to try to schedule a special meeting at some future time to review the audits.
Okay,
What do we have on that,
and
Sandy?
just for clarification, it's not a special meeting, so it would just be a regular meeting of the
Okay.
commission, of the committee.
Thank you.
In speaking with our local agencies, because we do schedule around their city council meetings and their other evening meetings. They have indicated they are all available on September 13th. But if the committee can't meet on that meeting, we can go back to them with a date that most of us, so that would be a Wednesday, that would be the second Wednesday in September. And I realize that's difficult, not everybody has their life schedule in front of them.
Mhm.
But I can also send out a list of dates if the 13th isn't good for everybody, and we'll see where we can all meet.
Well,
Still at 5 PM.
It would still be at 5, yes.
does anyone have a conflict with the 13th?
Trying to see.
At what time?
It would be at 5 o'clock. Mhm. And I realize that's not much notice, it's 4 weeks.
I'm good.
Okay. I'm good.
Does that look, okay, we'll wait for Janice.
It looks like I'm good.
Okay, then I will speak with our local agencies again and get it scheduled, and I'll send a notice out to everybody letting you know that that's been finalized. Thank you very much.
Okay, under item B then, and you'll send out a reminder.
I will, absolutely,
Thanks.
yes.
Agenda items for next meeting, I don't have anything off the top of my head, but now that we walked through the Brown Act, I may and others may. So if we do, have, something that a member wants placed on the agenda, they can call me or email me and we'll channel that through myself, correct?
Yeah, you can contact
And you
me.
just let Sandy know.
Okay, good deal, yeah, thank you. So everyone understand, if you have something that you want to see placed on the agenda, give me an email, I'll, give everyone my email if you like it, and my phone number, no problem. Call me and then, we'll discuss it and we'll bring it to Sandy.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully we'll do it right. Okay, and then, items from committee members, let's start down on the far left.
I just have a question. You brought up this 1/2 cent, is that really a 1/2%?
It's a 0.5%. It
So this
depends
is a
on the
typo.
context and how you're talking about and implement it, but it's a 0.5% tax rate. So for example, here in the city of Madera, we pay 8.25% tax rate. 0.5% of that is Measure T.
But it would also be right that it is a 0.5 cent on every dollar also.
Right.
So either way is proper, right?
It is, and that's why sometimes we use it interchangeably internally, that it can be confusing to the public, for sure. If we present it both ways and we get questions both ways, depending on how we print it, and so it's like, well, what's the right way? I don't know.
Okay. 0.05.
Max?
Nothing.
Okay. April? That would be, leave it to me. So I'll be brief. Best meeting I've been to in 4 years. Thank you so much. I'm extremely happy with the way staff, all staff has responded to my inquiries and helped me through this process. It took me 2 years to figure out the MCTA, MCTT, that policy and how they all interact. So tonight was very beneficial for my personal viewpoint. The committee, to have this type of input from all the committee, everyone participated in this. Didn't see a lot of that for the last 4 years, so you're to be commended. This is what is expected of us, and I as a committee member and the chair, you know, we don't want to comment on how we feel on Measure T, but I will tell you as a resident of this county, everyone here is a resident of this county. I'll just speak for myself. As a resident of this county, we need it and we want to see it pass. We also want the Oversight Committee not to be kicked around in the community as just a rubber stamp. We want to provide meaningful oversight. We do. We want to change things, and we want to work with staff to bring those changes about. That's my personal goal for the next year. And I hope everyone reflects on that. And thank you for your time. Thank you, staff. We kept you in an extra hour. Sorry about that, but it was a good meeting. Any comments from the public in closing? Okay. Motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay, no one. Meeting adjourned.